Hi, this is Dan Matson. Please note that this podcast was created several years ago. Some of the links, email addresses, phone numbers, and promos are outdated and no longer valid. If you want to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Once again, that's woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thanks and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats, weekly podcast episode number 9. I am your host, Dan Matson, and this is the world's first podcast, the very first in the world, fully dedicated to the art, craft, history, and tradition of wooden boats. Thanks for joining me this week, folks. It's great to have you again. We're on episode 9, which is awesome. I've been doing this for over a couple months now. My audience and subscriber list continues to grow slowly, which is pretty exciting. That means people are listening and looking at my blog, and they're getting into this, which is pretty cool. Just a reminder that this podcast is weekly, and I release it on Thursdays. However, this coming week, Thanksgiving is on a Thursday, so I might be a day late releasing it. So this coming week, or next week, it'll be either Thursday or Friday. In this episode of Hooked on Wooden Boats, I have an interview with Rich Kolin. Rich is a builder, designer, author, and teacher. He's lived in the Northwest for quite a few years and lived in California for a while, and it's a very fascinating interview, so I hope you enjoy that. I'd like for you to connect with me, and I say this in every episode, but I'm going to continue to say it. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Zune, or BlackBerry directories. My website is hookedonwoodenboats.com. On my website, you can subscribe to my e-news list, which is in the upper right-hand corner of the website. You can leave comments and look at show notes on the website also. And if you want to email me, my email is dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. On Twitter, I'm at twitter.com/woodenboatdan if you want to follow me there. I'm not a Twitter expert by any means. I'm still figuring it out myself, all the hashtags and stuff, but I'm getting into it. It's kind of fun. And let's see, I'm on Facebook too, at facebook.com/woodenboatdan if you'd like to go to my page and like the page. And I have a voicemail feedback hotline also at 424-261-2360. Well, I need some help, folks. Last week, Brian Hansen called in and asked where he could locate the video called The Big Build, which is a 45-minute story and video of Jay Smith, the Nordic boat builder, building a 21-foot long boat in his shop in Anacortes. This video was published, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago, and I have not been able to find it on the internet or on the History Channel. So if you can help me with that, I would love it. Please, if you have any information on that, email me or call my feedback hotline. And I'd like to find that video and satisfy my friend Brian. That would be great. And I would like to see it too, so... Let's see what else here is new. I have a resources page on my website now. If you go to the menu at the top and click on resources, I've got some things of interest there. I've got some magazines, actually just one magazine, Wooden Boat Magazine. You can subscribe to that. And I've got some books on there that I like, wooden boat books, and some tools, a couple tools, and some epoxy. And so what I did is I signed up for the Amazon Affiliates program. So if you go to my site and you click on one of these items and you make a purchase, I get paid 4%. Now, I'm an accountant, and 4% of a $13 book is about 52 cents. 26, that's 2%. So if you buy a $13 book, I make 52 cents. So it's not a whole lot of money, but hey, if somebody wants to buy some books and they're on my site, and I make a buck or two here and there, that's good with me. So check out our resource page if you would. My resource page. I'm still trying to talk in the first person. Today was a good day. I made some connections with some folks that I'm going to be interviewing in the future. Jake Beatty, who is the executive director of the Northwest Maritime Center in Port Townsend. I'm going to be meeting with him next week for an interview. And I'm also going to meet with Marty Loken from the Island Boat Shop. And I emailed Marty today and asked him if he would be willing to let me come out to his shop and interview him. And he said, yeah, come on out. And then here's what he said in his email. Nice to hear from you. We appreciate your efforts to celebrate traditional boats, boat designs, boat builders, and others involved in classic watercraft. And it's like, that was really cool to hear that. It's like, it makes it worth it to do this when I get that kind of feedback. People tell me, hey, thanks for your efforts to celebrate this wooden boat tradition. This is really cool. So that was really encouraging. So I'm going to be meeting with Marty at his shop in Nordland, Washington next week also. And then today I stopped by Emerald Marine in Anacortes, where James McMullen, he's actually the owner there, and showed me some of the boats he's working on, and we're going to try to hook up in December for an interview. James is a guy that's built, personally, probably 20 or 30 boats for himself, has built lots of boats for other folks, and does some really cool stuff in Anacortes, Washington. So let's see what else here. My friend Cliff Ravenscraft, the podcast answer man, he was at Blog World LA last week, and he gave a talk there about podcasting. And he mentioned me in his talk. He talked about how I have passion for wooden boats and kind of gave a little story about me, which is pretty cool. If you want to listen to that, you can go to podcastanswerman.com/235. That's the number 235. And about 8 minutes into the audio, he gives that little example. So if you want to hear that, you can. Next up here, we have my interview with Rich Kolin. And Rich is a designer, builder, author. He carves paddles, he builds boats, he restores boats. He takes lines off boats. He's taught at the Center for Wooden Boats. A really cool guy. He allowed me to come to his house and see his shop and look at some of the stuff he'd done, and it was really a good time. So we're going to go ahead and start the interview. Take it away, Rich. Okay, it's October 7th, and I'm on Camano Island, Washington. I'm sitting here with Rich Kolin. Rich, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I met Rich about 3 or 4 weeks ago at a gathering, a small wooden boat gathering down at Cama Beach Center for Wooden Boats on Camano Island. And Rich has been involved with wooden boats for years and oar carving and all kinds of things. So I thought it'd be a fun guest to have on our show today. So Rich, where are you originally from?
Well, I was born actually in New York City, oddly enough, but I didn't live there very long, and kind of bopped around the East Coast, and then came out to the West Coast in 1962. Went off to the Army, and of course, when I was a kid, growing up in New Jersey, I had a boat and liked sailing, and so when I got back from the Army, I moved to Santa Cruz, California, and went to the University of California there, and while I was there, started getting involved in boat carpentry and boat building and stuff like that. And by the time I graduated, I'm sure I was a better boat builder than I was a student, but I got a degree in government from them at the University of Washington. And then I had my boat shop there, and that's where you had asked me about John Gardner, and that's where I ran into those guys. Pete Culler and John Gardner were two of my mentors early on. And
Pete who?
Pete Culler.
Pete Culler and John Gardner.
He wrote a book called Skiffs and Schooners that was very influential in that in the 70s and 80s and stuff. There's a lot of people who know them who worked in that period. Of course, he's kind of disappeared.
Right.
But
okay. And John Gardner, for our listeners who don't know, was considered an expert on dory construction
no,
methods.
much more than that. Much more.
I mean, that was part of it.
Right. He was a guy that for some reason, he had a master's degree in English from Columbia, and he had he was the first dropout. He was kind of a boat building hippie, I suppose. But anyway, instead of going on to some Ivy League career, he instead went to work in boat shops, and he started writing articles in 1950 for the Maine Coast Fishermen, which was bought out by National Fishermen, and that gave him a national audience. I mean, those of us who are in those days would subscribe to National Fisherman to get his articles, and there was a whole revival of crafts at the time, and one of the crafts was the wooden boat building thing, and he became the guru of that whole thing.
Was this in the 50s and 60s?
No, this would be, he'd been writing clear through then, but the small craft revival really probably started to happen in the late 60s, 70s, and maybe gone through even the 80s at that point. But I remember I had my first classes at the Center for Wooden Boats, which I had moved up here by 78. I had an oar building class, had 14 people in it, and classes would just fill. I mean, there was no problem there. Port Townsend started having their symposium, and that place was mobbed. I taught a number of classes at the symposium one year, and just people were not filled the rooms; they were flooding into the hallways, and there was a tremendous interest. It was really wild. And of course, at that point, Pete Culler came out with his skiffs and schooners, and Pete was a guy that was really into the traditional ways of boat building. He had been a boat builder all his life, and he became the guru for that part of the movement. John was more technical, and not only did he, every month he came out with a new boat, a new boat design based on the work he'd been doing, but he was also interested in working with epoxies and some of the newer materials and figuring out that kind of thing. So he did some plywood boats too. Of course, his Dory book was one of the first he came out with, but all those books that he came out with were based on designs he developed for National Fishermen or Maine Coast Fishermen. And I remember he came out here for one of those symposiums, and after that he came down to Seattle to Dick Wagner's boathouse, and a lot of our local guys were there. And then that evening they were on the Virginia 5. They had Dick had set that up.
Which was a big sailing vessel, was it?
No, the Virginia 5 is steamers.
A steamer, okay.
It's the old, Mosquito fleet, the last of the Mosquito fleet. And so we met there, and that's when he suggested that he had talked to Dick over the years. Both of us, as well as many others, John kept a tremendous correspondence, and I had been corresponding with him for years. And he suggested to the people, he said, well, you've done a lot of work here. It's about time you sat down and put together a hands-on museum. And that's where the whole idea really to get that going. And so his dream was to do the hands-on museum. By that time, he had retired from the boatyards, and he had been given the job as the curator for small craft at Mystic Seaport, Connecticut.
John Gardner.
Gardner.
Yeah.
And that's about when they started publishing National Fishermen, I think, published the first couple of books where they were putting together, I think the Dory book was the first, but then they had a whole series of books where they took his designs from Maine Coast Fishermen and National Fishermen and put them into a book. And then when he moved to Mystic Seaport published the last few of those. And so fortunately that was really good because it there's some great work there, and he describes all how to build them and all that stuff. So that's a tremendous resource.
So did you study under John then when you were in
No,
California?
I was doing this because I was on the West Coast, he was on the East Coast. So we just corresponded, and then periodically we'd bump. At one point, I had started we had small craft meets at Santa Cruz, and they had people from Los Angeles and Seattle there. We'd have 80 or 90 people and maybe 30 boats. And every year we had one of those for about 3 or 4 years. And in fact, that's still going on. A lot of the people continue that. So this was for the Traditional Small Craft Association. Now that was something that John Gardner started in because of the Coast Guard. They decided the boats were unsafe, and apparently the biggest problem was all of these bass boats. Would go, down there extremely fast, and people were, getting hurt. So then they decided to do these regulations for the whole industry, and they decided that rowboats there was no such thing as a rowboat. It was a boat that would have 2 horsepower or less, and they had a whole bunch of safety formulas. They had to have so much flotation, and the formula was based on one of the factors, the width of the transom. So if you had a double ender or say a Whitehall boat with the transom isn't very
no
wide,
transom,
then the capacity would be some outrageously low figure. Anyway, it was basically stupid because how they worked it was typical Washington, where if you had a lobby group, for instance, canoes and kayaks and sailboats were exempted from these rules. So I mean, it was a loophole that and then they didn't want to fix. Anyway, we're to get into it. He started the Traditional Small Craft Association was formed to try to counter that. They were talking about trying to do a lobbying organization, which never became.
What year was that started?
Oh boy, that must have been around 72 or 3, 19. And at that point, we were doing our and they had started a kind of a mimeograph kind of newsletter, and we were doing the West Coast thing, and we were doing our mimeograph newsletter that we were sending to the West Coast. So then John Gardner and Pete asked me to take over their newsletter, and I had this, I think, to be honest with you, the lobbying idea wasn't working. I mean, that takes a lot of money and a lot of organization, which we didn't have. But I saw it as potential of getting people who are interested in the movement in one place, on one membership list. And so I started pushing with that, and I was talking with Dick Wagner at the time, trying to get the people in because they had a group here in Puget Sound, trying to get them involved in it. And that proved to be somewhat difficult, but anyway, so we started the newsletter, and we did about 4 or 5 issues. I forget exactly how many. And then when I moved up here, we turned it over to somebody on the East Coast, and they've done a wonderful job, and that's still going.
And you're talking about the
Traditional Small
Craft Association. Yeah, there's a Puget Sound chapter here.
Yeah,
and
different
chapters around.
Yeah, and that was the group that was there at that meet that you were at.
Right.
And they're headquartered in Anacortes now.
Oh, they are?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's still there. It's not the heyday, the glory days of the small craft revival, which probably in the 70s was probably peaked then. But it's still there. It's a lot calmer than it was, but it's still there. And of course, you're part of that, really, and that there are people interested enough to do things like the Puget Sound chapter and what you're doing. So it's worth doing. And to me, it was always a fun thing to do. You could design it, you could build it, you could do it yourself.
Yeah, right. Do it in your garage.
Yeah, you didn't have to. You weren't. So many other things you have to. You get a big boat. I mean, you're so dominated by chandlers and repair people and yards and marinas. I mean, it's like
mortgage fees,
the amount,
trailers,
and all that stuff. Even just a trailer boat. By the time you get the pickup and the trailer and all that stuff. It's like the amount of time you get to spend on the boat, is a fraction of what it should be. And,
tell me about the boatyards that you owned or worked in over the years.
Well, I worked in a lot of them. And when I was in Santa Cruz, there was only one there. And I worked there several times, on big repair projects when they needed an extra pair of hands. And the funny thing is, I left there, I got a call from the owner, and I think he wanted me to take over the yard. But by that time, I've already bought a house up here and stuff. And so, that just kind of vanished. I didn't really want to move back to Santa Cruz. But when I came up to Anacortes, there were all at that time probably 6 or 7 different yards, various sizes, and then a few people freelancing who were taking on employees. So I work with any one of those groups anytime 3 to 5 or 6 weeks, maybe 3 months at the most, in the spring usually, in the summer. And then I just do my freelance work to fill it out.
And what kind of freelance work were you doing exactly?
Well, I do repair, woodworking.
Some on bigger boats too, like
right. Some bigger boats, some small boats, but mostly on around the docks. I did a lot of work for some of the charter companies because their boats have to be up to snuff all the time, so if they got banged or something broke or one thing or another, and sometimes just modified to make it easier to charter, I'd go and do that work. So there was always something to do. But after about 20 years of all that, you start getting a little older, you're a little creakier, you begin to realize that your body wasn't going to hold out very much longer. And I'd done about all the things I wanted to do with that, And that's when I decided to go back to school. And I went up to Western Washington University and got a degree in manufacturing engineering. And then went off to work at the Boeing company here in Everett.
Oh, really?
And that's when I moved down to Marysville. And I lived on the reservation for almost 20 years. Which was fun because one of the things I got into there is working with the Indian cultures and some of the canoes and the other things. And,
really?
And we actually had one project that never quite got finished, but we had done all the groundwork to build a series of 18 45-foot northern canoes for members of the Tsimshian tribe. And that fell through, which is sadly, but we really enjoyed doing that, the group of people that I had recruited. And then later, I had befriended the master carver of the Tutelage tribes who had done some really marvelous work doing Nootka canoes. And so I got to talk with him and talk with how he did it. We just became friends. And so the last thing I did before I left the reservation was to design a Nootka canoe for the tribe, which is now hanging. They built it, and it's now hanging above their the desk at their new administrative center.
Oh, okay.
So, which is actually nice, and the boats that we did at Camano Beach is because for boat building, most of the time somebody takes the boat and goes away, and you never see it. So you go through a slow period, and you suddenly realize there's nothing.
So what method of construction was that canoe? How was that built?
That was
Rich?
strip plank.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. We had done a lot of work on this 45-foot canoes. We'd done a lot of design work. We did a lot of testing of materials and techniques. So it really got me into this, strip building and what was it about and so on. So we actually did do me and a friend of mine did an 18-foot Gardner design. He did a Harris-shop. He developed the Harris-ship rowboat, which was a rough set of lines that Harris-shop had set off as an example in his the common sense of yacht design. He presented that model as a good set of lines. So John whipped out by a set of lines and a construction plan, which he included in one of his books, and we built that. It was 18 feet in strip plank, and it came out very nice. But as usual, what happened is a frustrating thing for a boat builder a lot of times is by the time the guy decides to go ahead and spend the money and build the boat, the guy's too old to use it. And that's, unfortunately, I always watch that, but you feel yourself doing that. The time you really feel that, I can spend the money because I might die tomorrow. I'll have this boat built that requires me manually to be operating it, and so you can see yourself going down the drain with that one.
Yeah.
But the Centerfoot Boats thing took off. I was involved in when that thing got started, and I was still down in Santa Cruz, and Dick was up working here on Lake Union. And then when I moved up here, I think I might have already been a member, but I started teaching classes. And one of the first boats that I built is a boat I designed called the Heidi. It was a 12-foot skiff, and then I wrote my first book on how to build that.
Oh, really?
So I wrote two. One is called Building the Catherine, which is a lap-shaped Whitehall boat, and those were published by Wooden Boat Publishing. Wooden Boat Magazine.
What's the other one called?
Building the Catherine.
Building the Catherine?
Yeah.
And then you said you
they
wrote
had
a
kind of
second-
they kind of, we were talking about a series or something, so they said Wooden Boats Made Easy was the name of their series, and the first one was Heidi, and the second one was the Catherine.
And Heidi was the skiff.
The skiff, and that and variations of it are the skiffs I've been building in my classes when I do skiff classes.
So tell me about that skiff. What kind of construction is that? And
well,
materials
it basically is inspired by, although it's my own lines and stuff, the construction was inspired by Pete Culler's Good Little Skiff. That's a little, anyway, it was a really neat. I built one of those for a customer, and I was really impressed with it. And basically, it's lap straight sides. The bottom is cross-planked. When I wrote the book, I had, basically built the way we used to build them on the East Coast, and boats stayed in the water, so you could just butt the planks on the bottom, and it would swell up and be fine. But the problem is, around here, people are trailering things. So if you really build them the way the old people build them, you'd have a boat that leaks all the time.
Yeah.
Because
the planks shrink up and you put them in the water.
Especially if you're driving on 60 miles down the freeway. I mean, that's just like, that'll take the moisture out of the hull. So I did some experimenting, and what I ended up with is I use a polyurethane. There's this thing called 5200, which is an adhesive. And you want to stay away from that like the plague, because it's so much stronger than the wood.
Oh, really?
That it doesn't sand. It's hard to clean up, and it's just a mess. And if you had to take the thing apart, you'd split the wood apart.
Oh, wow.
But there's a thing that may actually fit all these companies that make that polyurethane have a variation, which is a bedding compound, and that you can pull apart, and yet it's perfect for wooden boat building because it has high adhesive. So, I mean, all the boats down in Cama are built using that
it stays flexible, but it seals.
It seals. I mean, some of those boats are 8 years old. They don't leak. And, I mean, none of my boats leak. And it was kind of a breakthrough from that standpoint because, I've seen, and they built some wonderful boats at the Port Hadlock and things, but you can see where, if you don't have them in the water all the time, you're going to launch them and the water's just going to come right up into them.
So what species lumber you were using?
Usually cedar plank, red cedar plank. For backbones, for these small boats, I usually like to use fir or sometimes Alaskan yellow, but I like to, some of the Whitehall boats, the long narrow ones, tend to be a little whippy in the keel, so it's almost neat if you laminate the keel up with fir. It's just real stiff. Gives the boat a backbone, you don't get as much twisting. But anyway, that's usually what I do. I stay away from oak usually because it rots so easily, and whenever there's rot around here, it's generally in the oak. So that's
in the red oak, or
we use white oak.
Okay.
One of the best oaks for boat building is the Oregon white oak. It used to grow through this area, but most of the stuff was during the pioneer period. They chopped it up for firewood or hopefully they built some boats out of it. But
Yeah.
you can still get it in Southern Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's not rare. But anyway, that was a good one. And then I used to use a lot of Honduras mahogany when it was cheaper. But now, a lot of times, if a guy's got a boat that's going to be used a lot, I think they're better off painting the whole thing. You know, people who have Honduras mahogany in boats want to varnish, but people like to put a lot of varnish on the beginning, but they don't like to maintain them. To make it look nice, you almost have to be at it every few months, or it's going to eventually start to burn out, and then it'll look terrible. And then there's also the people who like to use oils, and what oils do, they evaporate faster than varnish, but they also tend to collect dirt, and so you end up with kind of a mess, kind of ugly looking thing. But you know, people think, you know, a lot of these things are sold as work reducing things, and they really don't. In the long run, they're much more paint. It's great. I mean, if you paint a boat and you keep it out of the direct sunlight, you know, keep it under cover, direct sunlight, and away from water, you know, rain, and don't let it get rain on stuff. I mean, the original Catherine, I had it for 7 years, and I never really painted it once. I did some touch-up work on it. I had the original paint, so the colors matched. But, you know, from that, I did a little bit, but I never repainted the whole thing. And so, you know, boats can be low maintenance if you care for them properly.
Right.
But anyway, and you know, and to get back to the centerfoot boats, you know, they have grown so much over the years. It's been a slow and steady thing, and actually not so slow lately. They seem to be going by leaps and bounds. And I got involved with, you know, I became a member very early, and then later I became the vice president on the board, and for a time. And then when I found that the commuting down to Seattle was just a little too much for me, and I was getting older and had to start living life simpler, so I resigned that position. But I'm still a life member, and I stay with what their program is. And
it's nice they've got this center. It's probably, 10 minutes, 15 minutes from your house here? The new, at Camano Beach on Camano Island. That's a beautiful
one of the reasons
facility.
I came up here, so that I could keep an eye on what they were doing. And I you know, like I said, I really like what this.
So what kind of projects or classes have you been doing down at Camano Beach?
Well, I really haven't been doing very much. At some point, we had moved the classes up to my shop at Tutelage, and then, you know, when Dick got out of the leadership there, he's still emeritus, but they changed over. People started asking, why are we having boat building classes up in Marysville when we're, you know, so they moved everything down there, and then a lot of stuff just got discontinued. So they're still doing some work down there, but part of the thing is, when it was up at my shop, I could always, if only 2 people signed up, we'd still have the class, you know, and I just took what came in the door. So there was a lot of stuff, you know, or if we didn't have enough of the materials, I put in the materials. So, you know, we're doing a lot of stuff like that, kept it going. But if you're trying to make money at something, like some of the people on the board at that time, they were trying to make money at everything. And my saying on that is, if you could make money on small boats, we'd be all in business. We wouldn't be in the centerfoot boats.
Yeah, right.
The reason why we have a nonprofit is you can't make any money at it, you know.
Yeah.
So,
right.
But I hope that so they stopped a lot of that, and I feel bad about it, and I hope someday they go back to it. They realize that that's something they have to subsidize. But anyway, be as it may, that's my belief. And I've been doing my teaching, most of it recently, through the school at Port Hadlock.
Oh yeah,
the School of Boat Building. Yes, okay. And they have a fantastic program. Gosh, you know, they're building anything from small boats to big boats, and a large part there. It's interesting, a large part of the people there, I'd say maybe 50% are actually older people who are just always want to learn about boat building, and who take their classes. I saw one guy, he'd been there for 3 years.
Wow.
And he's now on the board, and you know, he's into it. And there's a place you could just dive into this thing and you know,
really learn it. Yeah, I saw they're getting ready to offer a 3-month class here on, I think it's on rigging and sail making.
Yeah.
Looked like an awesome
They have
class.
a small boat class, and they have a large boat class, and then they have a modern, where they use strip planking and cold molding and all that stuff. So I mean, they put motors in boats. So, they have the whole package there, and they stopped for a while doing the summer classes, but we did one last year, and we had 11 people sign up for it. We had to turn them away. So
what class was that, Rich?
We built a Heidi skiff.
You did? Okay.
We did. We actually took 8 eventually. So they made some money on it, and actually we've always done well there. The center always had trouble for some reason. I'm not sure why. But Port Hadlock, my feeling is it probably is, there's not that many of us, but we're eager,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a word of mouth thing. And, you can go down to that school and you'll see all these boats being built, and it gets people excited. And so anyway, they've always done well there. And I think we'll see more classes next year.
Yeah. Cool. So tell me about a couple of the most interesting projects you've worked on over the years, as far as boats or things you've built.
I think some of the funnest period is when we were working out of my shop in Santa Cruz, Tulalip, because then I was able to, in a kind of a hobby thing, is going around and finding old boats, measuring them, learning about their history. And so I had some of those ready to go, and we could build them. Since I was in charge of the thing, and so I said, we're going to build, and some of them are down there at Cama, and they're beautiful boats, like the little Davis boat we have there. It's a 14-foot. It's an outboard boat, but it was designed around in the 1930s, and it's just a beautiful little boat. And the other one is a Shoalwater Bay tender. It's called dinghy, actually. That's what they called it. But it was a double ender. They built them from 14 to 18 feet. And they were designed to be tenders for the sailing oyster boats in Shoalwater Bay, which is now called Willapa Bay. Long Beach Peninsula.
Yeah, down on the coast of Washington.
Yeah. And that's the best.
They were designed for that, huh? Interesting. For the oyster industry down there.
Yeah, well, it was very shoal water, and the boats generally sometimes they'd have to be a mile offshore, so they needed a boat that was fast, but had to be for thin water.
Were they flat bottom boats then?
No, there was a number of different boats, but that one was a round bottom boat. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, the easiest rowing boat I've ever rowed, period.
Wow.
Usually when they're 14 feet, they drag a lot. You can feel it on the oars. This one, you don't feel it. It's just, skiffs, I think, are better rowers on the smaller sizes than the round bottom boats. But this one certainly does as well as a skiff will do. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I did the Herreshoff series, which was a series based on the Herreshoff rowing boats. That's Nathan Herreshoff. I think it was designed 1909 or something around there. It was the Columbia Lifeboat model. And I did a 9 and a 10.5 and a 13. And the 10.5 and the 13 are in the collection of Centerpoint Boats down in Seattle. Mm-hmm. So they've been very successful. A lot of people like those boats. And then I did a series of 3 boats for the lady. The Cama Beach was originally a salmon resort, and the family that ran it kept it until the old folks got too old to operate it, and the daughters are the ones that got the park to buy it, and they donated half, and they had Washington State buy the other half, and then that money they put into foundations, which they used to build the Cama Center, which is the kind of meeting and.
That's a beautiful facility.
It's a beautiful building.
Yeah,
and that's they donated that money. It was about $1.5 million or $2 million, something like that. But anyway, the lady, one of the ladies, Karen Hämäläinen, gave me money to first measure all the different boats they had. They had 8 different designs there. And so I measured them all and made plans for them.
So you take the lines off so you can build a table of offsets. Is that
right?
What you
Table
do?
of offsets, and then did the construction details so you could record what was there in case some point they start losing them and they are falling apart. And then she hired me to build 3 replicas. So, and those are in the rental fleet now. One of them is number 64, which is an outboard boat, and then there's 2 rowboats. There's a number 6, which is a 12-footer, and I think it's 28, which is a 14-footer. So if anybody wanted to get the idea, that 64 is very popular. They like those. They like to go fishing and crabbing out there. So
What size is that boat?
That one is 15 and a half feet overall.
Okay. It's got an outboard on it?
It gets an outboard. Yeah, there were...
V-bottom skiff type boat? Or?
They're V-bottom planked, cedar planked. And that one was not, but there was a whole series of the boats, actually the 14-foot V-bottom outboard boats and possibly, and maybe the skiffs, all the skiffs were actually built on site. They hired some people come down there and they actually built them on site. So there were 28 of these 14-footers and 5 of the 12-footers, and maybe when I got there were maybe 26, 27 of the 14-footers still there. I don't know how many might have got lost along the way. The number 64, which is, there were 2 outboards that were 15 and a half feet long. One was about a 4-foot beam, the other was closer to 5-foot beam. And they came from when other places went out of business, they bought them. And so they got a little huskier than a 14-footer was a small boat. So anyway, that's where they came from. And so there's a chance that people go down there want to get some idea what the experience was. They could actually rent those boats and try them out. So really successful. Once again, did them in the polyurethane bending compound, which, by the way, if anybody's interested, wants to do that, don't go to the Chandler's with a picture of the boat on it. They'll want anywhere $15 a tube, 10-ounce tube.
Oh, really?
Go to the hardware stores like the box stores, and those are, I think they're going up all the time. I think the last time I paid $5.60 or something a tube.
Really, for the same stuff?
It's the same stuff, and they call it polyurethane door and window caulk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
can you get it in different colors, or?
There's black and a white and kind of a tan thing. And I think
what brand is it, Rich?
Oh gosh, it just changed. But
is it 3M or?
No, it's not 3M. Oh gosh, I'm trying to. Tight Lock owns it now. The ones
Tight Lock.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. Wow, you can save a lot. $10 a tube.
You sure can, and that's per tube. I mean, if a guy doesn't use a lot, you can buy.
And that'll seal it up good. You can use a traditional building method.
Yeah,
take it in and out of the water.
You just have to remember to be careful with it because it's hell to clean up. So when I do a skiff, for instance, I tape all the seams, and then use it, and then come back with my thumb, and then wearing gloves, of course.
Yeah, right.
And then peel the tape off. As soon as you do that, you don't want to leave it on there. It'll glue it right to the boat. Then you have this big mess.
Yeah.
And then you're going to wipe off. You got to be really careful to wipe it off with. Actually, paint thinner will work, but the best thing to use is alcohol, because a lot of those thinners and stuff have kind of solvents in them that aren't good for you. But the alcohol seems to work real good. Mm-hmm. And you can buy that at any hardware store. But you have to be, and I have my students, and they go, there's always one that doesn't believe me. And I go, you got to clean it all up. You have to perfectly, when it's still sticky, you got to get it off. And then we'll turn it over, and we'll see a big area full of blobs, and I'll say, well, what happened there? And I'll go, oh, no, we don't. Okay, good. Here's a chisel. You clean it up. And by the end of it, they're going, oh, yeah, that's why you said that, because when you start using chisels, you start chewing up the way. It's ugly.
Yeah.
You gotta. Boat building can be really quick if you do everything in the proper order, the proper way. So I always just say it's 60 million easy to learn facts,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any fool can do it if he lives long enough,
Yeah.
But that's one of the steps you can't leave out.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about the carving that you've done. When I met you, you were carving some
I
oars
have.
and so
Actually,
on.
I've done some Indian paddles, and there's some other Indian things I've done. I've taken several classes with some master carvers and stuff.
Are
But
those things that you've built over there, Rich?
the models, no, but
But the Indian sculpting?
the box I did, and the paddle. You can go or look at it later.
Yeah, we're looking at some carvings that Rich did here in his living room, so we'll get some picture of those on the website.
Okay. Actually, how it happened is when I first opened my shop in Santa Cruz, I had built originally an 8-foot lap strake boat. It was my first lap strake boat. And I had designed it myself because I made this incredible design that when I made the molds and stuck it up there, it looked like a beehive. It was the ugliest, most outlandish thing you ever saw. But I'd already just made the transom and stuff. And so I took a kind of one of those jigsaws and sawed it till one half, anyway. I guess going to jiggle it. Reshaped it, and then built it. And it was all at 100, Philippine mahogany. So anyway, it was in the shop. And then I decided when I opened my business that I would do is kind of use it as a display model that would inspire. So I put a gaff rig on it, for an 8-foot boat, not exactly practical. And then I wanted to carve the name on the stern, so I had a friend that lived across the street who was an excellent carver and sculptor. He worked in marble and everything. And I said, geez, could you come over and carve a name board on this thing? So I carved this name board on the back and the name, and he said, because he was looking around the shop what I'd been doing, he said, you should be able to do this, And sure enough, so I started playing around with it, and pretty soon I was carving name boards, and we'd already done models, so it all kind of. This is kind of a business that tends to spread. You get into that, and next thing you know, Pete Culler was saying you can't get decent oars anymore, which is absolutely right. I mean, they're usually heavy or clunky or misshaped and stuff, and so. I got into making my own oars, and I talked to Pete, and I got some better ideas. I ended up making oars for the San Francisco rowing clubs,
cool.
And built, thousands of pairs. I don't know how many I made altogether over the
Really?
years. Yeah, it's.
And there's a lot of hand tools involved in that.
A lot of hand tools, and it's really a neat
Chisels
project.
And spoke shaves.
Spoke shaves, draw knives, small planes. I do a little routing work when I'm doing them for many, but there's nothing more enjoyable. Playing, they're just good. It's just a great project, I think, because you're really shaping stuff, and
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to get a low-angle block plane out and take some wood down and eyeball it.
You bet.
Shape
And the spoke shape is one of my. There's
You
tools
like
that are
spoke shaves?
friendly, and that is. It doesn't make a lot of noise. It's not pretentious, and yet wood just moves, and with a lot of control. So the spoke shape's a neat thing.
Right. So for our listeners, Rich, how about if you give us your contact information if somebody has a project they'd like to talk to you about, or maybe a class to instruct or whatever? Could you give us your contact information?
Sure. Well, my address is 763 Arrowhead Road, Camano Island, 98282. My telephone number is 360-659-5591. And my email which is the easiest way to do it, is Kolin1, that's KOLIN numeral 1, at wavecable.com.
Okay, cool.
And so if anybody's interested in this kind of stuff, they can contact me.
They can give you a call or
Yeah.
email or whatever.
And
Email's a good way, isn't it?
Right now, my suspicion, if you want to take these classes, what an opportunity. I wish I'd had that available when I was learning, because it's real hard by yourself to try to struggle through this crap. Like I said, it's just a lot of easy stuff. I mean, it's a lot of it, and you're trying to do it yourself. It just can be, keep you up nights.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
I can impart in a week. You kind of see the whole thing. So if they're interested in classes right now, they should contact the Northwest School of Boat Building in Port Hadlock.
Okay.
They have a website.
Okay,
And,
cool. Do that. Any parting comments for our listeners, Rich?
Well, I'm glad if you're listening, and you must have enough interest, and I just hope you stay with it and have a good time.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Good.
Rich, thanks so much for letting me come out to your place and interview you for my show. That was really a lot of fun, and I hope the listeners enjoyed that. We're going to wrap it up here, folks. Please call the listener hotline with any comments or questions, 424-261-2360. Or you can email me at dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com or leave a comment on the website, hookedonwoodenboats.com. Also, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me a review on iTunes. A 5-star review would be awesome. If you enjoy the show, you can support me that way. And I hope you guys have a great week and a blessed Thanksgiving next week. Until next week, keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out.